The words landed like a slap. "Everyone, let me introduce the woman we all have to tolerate tonight." I felt the room lean forward before the punchline even came. Sophia lifted her champagne glass, smiling like she was doing me a favor. "My husband's mother. Isn't she memorable?" Laughter rippled across the ballroom, polite at first, then louder, freer, as if permission had been granted. Someone near the head table snorted. Someone else clapped. I stood there under the warm glow of chandeliers, my spine straight, my hands perfectly still, while 100 strangers decided it was acceptable to laugh at me. At my own son's wedding, the wedding I paid for. The band kept playing, oblivious. The waitstaff froze, unsure whether this was part of the program. My son stood beside his new wife, smiling too late, too stiff, like he was trying to catch a train that had already left the station. Then I noticed the silence spreading outward from one corner of the room. Sophia's father had gone completely still, his face drained of color so fast it was almost theatrical. The man who'd been laughing seconds ago stared at me like he'd just seen his reflection in a cracked mirror. "Wait," he said hoarsely. You're Lauren, aren't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. "You were at the executive briefing last quarter," he continued, voice tightening. "In San Diego. You." He stopped himself. Hard. The laughter died mid-breath. The chandeliers felt suddenly too bright. That was when I understood something important. This wasn't humiliation anymore. This was a turning point. So let me introduce myself properly. My name is Lauren. I'm 61 years old. I'm a widow. I raised my son alone after his father died when he was 13. I've spent 3 decades building a career most people assume belongs to a man they've never met. I don't raise my voice. I don't announce my power. I walk into rooms quietly and let other people underestimate me. Tonight, that mistake was going to cost someone dearly. 2 hours earlier, I'd been in the bridal suite adjusting my son's tie because he couldn't get it straight, no matter how many YouTube videos he watched. He hugged me stiffly and thanked me for everything, the way people do when they don't want to define what everything actually means. Everything meant the venue overlooking the Pacific in La Jolla. Everything meant the custom suit, the string quartet, the 6-tier cake flown in from Los Angeles. Everything meant the $280,000 I wired without hesitation because I believed love was something you invested in. Standing there now, listening to laughter fade into confusion, I realized something else. Love without boundaries doesn't make you generous. It makes you convenient. And as Sophia's father stared at me, finally understanding who I was and what I represented, I felt something settle inside my chest, not anger, not embarrassment, clarity. This wasn't the night I was insulted. This was the night I stopped being invisible. The reception didn't end after that moment. It fractured. People pretended to return to their conversations, but no one actually did. Eyes followed me. Whispers bloomed and died. The band restarted a slow jazz number that felt wildly inappropriate, like playing background music during a crime scene cleanup. Sophia leaned toward her father, her smile cracking. "Daddy?" she whispered, suddenly unsure. He didn't answer her. He was still looking at me. I finally met his gaze, not with a smile, not with defiance, but with recognition. The kind you give someone when you realize they've just figured out the rules of a game you've been playing far longer than they have. "Lauren," he said again, more carefully this time. "From Westbridge Consulting." I inclined my head slightly. Not a bow, not a greeting, an acknowledgement. His wife touched his arm. "What's going on?" she asked, voice tight. Sophia laughed nervously. "Dad, you're acting weird." He cut her off without looking at her. "Sophia, sweetheart, maybe we should..." She pulled her arm away. "Should what?" "You're embarrassing me." That word, embarrassing. I glanced toward my son. Ethan stood beside his wife, jaw clenched, eyes darting between me and her family like he was watching a car accident in slow motion and couldn't decide which side of the road to stand on. He didn't say my name. That hurt more than the insult. I stepped away from the table, heels clicking softly against marble, and walked toward the terrace doors. I didn't run. I didn't rush. Power doesn't hurry. In the ladies' room, I locked myself into a stall and sat down, not because my legs gave out, but because I needed exactly 30 seconds to let the truth land. I had just been publicly diminished by a woman half my age, surrounded by people who laughed because they believed they were untouchable. And my son had let it happen. When I stood at the mirror moments later, I barely recognized the woman staring back. My makeup was flawless, hair untouched, posture perfect, but my eyes were different. They looked awake. I washed my hands slowly, dried them carefully, and checked my phone. One new message from my assistant, just confirming board materials are finalized. Monday, 8:30 a.m. Redwood Conference Room. I stared at the screen and felt something dangerous bloom behind my ribs. Monday, I reapplied my lipstick not because I needed it, but because ritual matters. Then I walked back into the ballroom. Sophia's father intercepted me halfway. "Lauren," he said, too quickly. "May I speak with you?" "Of course," I replied calmly. Sophia followed us, heels clicking, confusion curdling into suspicion. "Why are you talking like you know her?" Her father swallowed. "Because I do." I watched realization dawn too slowly on Sophia's face. She had never bothered to ask questions about me. Not really. She'd been too busy deciding what category I belonged in. "Well?" she demanded. "What is this about?" Her father exhaled. Lauren led the acquisition review that nearly shut down our expansion last year. The color drained from Sophia's cheeks. "I didn't shut it down," I corrected gently. "I delayed it." "There's a difference." Sophia laughed. "Brittle. You're exaggerating." "Dad, she's just Ethan's mom." Her father's voice dropped. "She's also the woman the board listens to when she speaks." Silence pressed in around us. Sophia looked at me again, really looked this time. Not at my dress, not at my age, but at the way I stood, the way her father deferred without realizing it. "You never said any of this," she whispered. I smiled not unkindly. "You never asked." Ethan finally stepped forward. "Mom, maybe we should talk somewhere private." "Mom." Now he said it. I turned to him. "Later," I said softly. "Tonight is your wedding." Relief flashed across his face. He thought that meant I was letting it go. I wasn't. Sophia crossed her arms. "So what? Are we supposed to apologize now because you're... is important?" I studied her for a moment. She was beautiful, privileged, terrified. "No," I said. "You're supposed to apologize because you were cruel." Her mouth opened, closed. Her father cleared his throat. "Lauren, perhaps we could meet next week, just to clarify expectations." "Monday works," I said. "My office." His shoulders stiffened. "Of course." I turned back toward the table. Behind me, I heard Sophia hiss. "Why didn't you tell me she was someone?" "Someone." I walked away before she could finish the sentence. As I reached my seat, Ethan touched my arm. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be." I looked at his hand on my sleeve, and then up at his face. "You already did," I said quietly, and that's when I realized the insult wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the invitation. Because everything I had built every late night, every risk, every silent sacrifice had prepared me for this moment. They thought they had humiliated a mother. What they had actually done was wake a woman who was done being convenient. And Monday morning, they were all going to find out exactly who Lauren really was. The weekend after the wedding passed in a blur of silence. Ethan didn't call. Sophia didn't text. And for the first time in years, I didn't chase either of them. Monday morning arrived wrapped in coastal fog, the kind that softens edges and hides consequences until it's too late to turn back. I dressed the way I always did for days that mattered. Charcoal suit, ivory blouse, minimal jewelry. Nothing sentimental, nothing soft. At exactly 8:27 a.m., I walked into the Redwood conference room. Daniel Cross was already there. Sophia's father looked smaller in daylight. Not weaker, just less impressive. The confidence he carried at the wedding had been replaced with something brittle, like glass pretending to be steel. 2 attorneys sat beside him, both pretending not to notice that I hadn't brought anyone. I never did. "Lauren," Daniel said, standing too quickly. "Thank you for meeting with us on such short notice." I took my seat at the head of the table. "You asked for clarification," I said. "I assume you're ready to listen." One of the attorneys cleared his throat. "Miss Lauren, we want to address the misunderstanding that occurred at the wedding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I replied calmly. "It was an insult." Daniel flinched. "My daughter didn't realize." "I don't care what she realized," I interrupted. "I care what she did." Silence stretched. I opened the folder in front of me and slid a single document across the table. Daniel's eyes flicked down, and the color drained from his face. "This is the finalized board vote from last quarter," I said. "Effective today, I'm assuming interim oversight of your expansion division." One attorney stiffened. "With respect, that division is under Mr. Perius. Crosses authority," I finished, "which is conditional and revocable." Daniel swallowed. It's personal." I leaned back slightly. "If this were personal, you wouldn't be sitting here." That landed. I stood, walked to the glass wall overlooking the city, and spoke without turning around. "You invited me into your family's orbit because you believed I was harmless. Convenient. A woman who could write a check and then disappear politely into the background." I turned back. "You were wrong." Daniel nodded slowly. "What do you want?" There it was. The question men like him always asked when they realized the power had shifted. "I want respect," I said. "Not fear, not flattery. Respect. For me, and for the boundaries I've been too generous to enforce." One attorney exchanged a glance with the other. "And your daughter?" Daniel asked carefully. "She owes me a real apology," I said. "Not because of my position, but because cruelty doesn't become acceptable just because it's wrapped in champagne and laughter." Daniel nodded. "I'll speak to her." "You already should have," I replied. When I left the room, I didn't feel victorious. I felt lighter. That afternoon, Ethan finally called. "Mom," he said, voice strained. "Can we talk?" "We are talking," I replied. There was a pause. "Sophia's been struggling." I closed my eyes. "She called me what she did because she believed you would tolerate it," I said quietly. "And because she believed you had prepared her to. That's not fair. It's accurate." He exhaled sharply. "I never said she could disrespect you." "No," I said. "You just taught her that my feelings were optional." That silence was heavier. "Mom," he said finally, "I just wanted things to be easy." I almost laughed. "Love isn't easy," I replied. "It's honest, and honesty requires courage." Another pause. Then, softly, "Did I lose you?" The question broke something open in me. "No," I said, "but you came closer than you realize." Sophia's apology came that night. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't eloquent. It was quiet, shaking, and real. "I was afraid of you," she admitted. "And instead of dealing with that, I tried to make you small." I accepted the apology. Not because she deserved immediate forgiveness, but because I refused to become someone who fed on resentment. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. And it didn't mean returning to the old arrangement, because something fundamental had changed. I was no longer the woman willing to absorb discomfort to keep the peace. I was the woman who understood that peace without respect is just silence with better lighting. And Ethan was about to learn what adulthood actually required, because the final reckoning wasn't with Sophia, it was with my son, and that conversation was coming next. The conversation with my son happened 3 nights later, not because I delayed it, but because Ethan did. He showed up at my house just after 7, standing on the porch like a teenager who'd broken curfew. No Sophia, no rehearsed confidence. Just my son, hands shoved into his pockets, shoulders tight with something heavier than nerves. I let him ring the bell twice before opening the door. "Mom," he said softly. I stepped aside without a word. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where he'd done homework, where I'd balanced checkbooks, where life had quietly happened for decades. I poured tea. He didn't touch his cup. "I didn't know how to talk to you," he finally said. "That's interesting," I replied. "You seem to manage just fine talking about me." He winced. "Sophia told you." "She did." Silence stretched. "I never meant to make you the villain," he said. "I was just trying to survive." I looked at him carefully. "Survive what, Ethan?" "My life," he admitted. "The pressure, her family, the expectations. Everyone around me is so polished, so successful. And then there's me. There's always been you," I said quietly, "and I've never been ashamed of that. But I was," he whispered. That confession hit harder than the insult at the wedding. "I didn't want to look like a man who needed his mother's money," he continued. "So I convinced myself and Sophia that you were controlling, that the help came with strings. It was easier than admitting I couldn't stand on my own yet. I folded my hands on the table. So you took my support and resented me for providing it. Yes, and when your wife humiliated me publicly, I froze. He said, I thought if I stayed quiet, it would blow over. I nodded slowly. That silence told her everything she needed to know. He looked up at me then, eyes red. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you. That's because you were focused on protecting your pride, I said. Not my dignity. The words landed hard. I love you, he said quickly. I've always loved you. I know, I replied. But love without accountability becomes entitlement. He swallowed. What happens now? I stood and walked to the counter, giving us both space to breathe. What happens now? I said. Is that I stop rescuing you. His head snapped up. What do you mean? I mean no more financial cushioning, no quiet fixes, no smoothing things over so you don't have to feel uncomfortable. But we just got married, and adulthood doesn't pause for weddings, I replied calmly. He stared at me, finally understanding. You're cutting me off. I'm cutting you loose, I corrected. There's a difference. Tears slid down his face. I'm scared. I know, I said gently. So was I when your father died. So was I when I signed my first loan alone. Fear doesn't excuse betrayal, but it can be the beginning of growth. He nodded slowly. I don't want to lose you. You won't, I said. But our relationship will change. How? You'll earn my respect the same way everyone else does, I said. By being honest, by standing up when it's hard, and by never again allowing someone to humiliate me to make yourself more comfortable. He stood, walked around the table, and hugged me, really hugged me for the first time in years. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know, I said. When he left, the house felt quieter, but not emptier. The following weeks proved something I hadn't expected. Ethan struggled, financially, emotionally, but he didn't collapse. Sophia struggled too, especially when she realized I was no longer the invisible safety net she could ignore. Her apology had opened a door, but respect had to walk through it on its own. At work, Daniel Cross adjusted quickly. Men like him always do when they realize the rules have changed. The expansion division improved. Meetings became efficient. Decisions became sharper. And me? I slept better. Because power doesn't come from humiliating others. It comes from knowing when to stop shrinking yourself for people who benefit from your silence. That night at the wedding didn't break me. It clarified me. And sometimes, the greatest gift someone can give you without meaning to is the moment you finally decide you're done being taken for granted. The morning after everything finally settled, I woke up before dawn, not because of anxiety, not because of regret, because for the first time in years, my mind was quiet. I made coffee and stood by the window, watching the sky lighten over the neighborhood I'd lived in since Ethan was in middle school. The same streets I'd driven down half asleep after late meetings. The same sidewalks I'd paced while on calls, juggling motherhood and leadership and grief like it was a skill you could master if you just tried hard enough. For years, I told myself this was what love looked like, paying quietly, fixing discreetly, absorbing discomfort so everyone else could stay comfortable. I told myself that being needed was the same as being valued. I was wrong. What that wedding night gave me, what Sophia's careless cruelty and Ethan's silence forced me to confront, was the truth I'd been avoiding. I had trained the people closest to me to expect my sacrifice, not my respect. And the moment I stopped performing that role, everything changed. Ethan didn't suddenly become a different man. He didn't transform overnight into the son I'd imagined when he was small and everything felt possible. But he did something far more important. He started taking responsibility for his choices, for his marriage, for the discomfort he'd been running from his entire adult life. Sophia didn't become my best friend. We didn't turn into some picture-perfect mother-in-law fantasy. But she learned quickly that kindness is not optional, and power doesn't excuse cruelty. Respect is earned every day, not inherited through marriage or money. And me? I stopped confusing generosity with obligation. I stopped mistaking silence for peace. I stopped believing that love requires you to shrink yourself so others don't feel threatened by your strength. Power, I learned, isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with speeches or revenge or public humiliation. Real power is the ability to walk away from roles that no longer serve you even when you built them yourself. If there's a lesson here, it's this. The people who benefit most from your overgiving will be the first to call you difficult when you finally draw a line. Let them. Boundaries don't destroy families. Lack of respect does. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for your children, for your family, for yourself, is to stop rescuing them from the consequences of their own choices. I didn't lose my son that night. I lost the illusion that being endlessly available was the same as being loved. What I gained was far more valuable. My clarity, my dignity, my peace. If this story resonated with you, you're not alone. So many of us, especially parents, especially women, are taught that love means endurance. It doesn't. Love means honesty. Love means accountability. And love absolutely means knowing when to stop being taken for granted. Thank you for listening. If you've ever been the convenient one, the silent supporter, the person everyone relies on but no one truly sees, share your story in the comments. This channel is for stories like yours, and I promise the next one goes even deeper.